Hey, welcome to my channel where I talk about my dolls, and that's literally it. And in this video, I'm going to be redressing the 6 dolls in front of me in rainbow colors because it's June, which is Pride. And because it's Pride, I'm going to talk about my childhood experiences collecting dolls or playing with dolls uh, because it kind of suits the theme of, being June and Pride. But having said that, I should probably give a little disclaimer here that it's some of the stories because not everybody was nice to me as a little boy who played with dolls. So some of the stories might get heavy or uncomfortable, and I want to preface it by saying I was fine. I'm fine. Life went on. As you can see, I'm fine playing with dolls to this day. And if there does come a story that's going to be heavier, I will try to give like a little trigger warning, let's call it, because especially later on in the story, as I get older, people got a little bit more ruthless, which is kind of a warning to say if you just want to watch me dressing the dolls, I'm going to, start in the order of the rainbow, the red, and then work my way across. And you could just like turn down the volume, speed up the speed if you want, which is probably good to watch all my videos that way, by the way. And then I'll put the doll in front of the camera so you can get like a really good view of them if that's all you're interested in. So now I think that's all I need to say before I get started. And I'll do my best to tell the stories in like linear order. But if I bounce around, it's because I'm multitasking. Like I'll do my best. So now I'm going to start the beginning of the story, which is the beginning, which is when I was about 4 years old. And I don't remember what made me fall in love with wanting to have a doll, but I just remember being so obsessed, fixated. Every night I would say to my mom, like, when am I going to get my doll? When am I going to get my doll? She'd be tucking me in bed and she'd be like, next week, next week. And later on, when I got older, I always asked about like, why did you say next week? And she told me that, after talking with like aunts and uncles, they said, oh, he's going to get over it. He's just jealous because he's got a sister in the house now. So don't give him the doll. Just keep telling him next week and he will forget. And I never forgot. I just kept wondering, how long is a week? Because I swear it went on for months, but it was probably really a week. And I remember when my mom finally caved and she took me to the store to buy me the doll. And I can remember the store. I remember that much. I remember the entire experience. I remember walking to up that toy aisle and looking up at this like wall of dolls and me picking out the one that I wanted the most. And there was another woman in the aisle and my mom was embarrassed. So here I am going, oh, that doll, mommy, I want that doll. And she was like, okay, William, let's just go. Get it and let's go. And I do remember the woman kind of looking down at us, really confused. And I should probably say that this was the 80s and this was not a very progressive time. When it comes to, let's say, LGBT issues, there were a lot going on back then. So I think a lot of people kind of they were kind of repulsed by that kind of behavior. But so the agreement to having this doll was that, I was starting school soon. So as long as I never took the doll to school, I could have one. And to be honest, I don't even think that my doll lasted until I made it to school. I have a feeling I have an older brother I shared a room with, like a very typical, strong, like, tough kid, 5 years older than I am. And, he was really popular and cool and all that stuff. I wasn't. And if I talk any stories to tell about him, I just want to make it clear that, he had his own, let's say, hard times having a brother like me because he was so popular and, worked really hard at his reputation. So here I was coming along to ruin everything. And so I have a feeling that he threw out my doll, got rid of it, this second chance he got, or even my father might have done it, who knows. I just know that I would spend every once in a while I'd remember about this doll and be like, it's in this apartment somewhere. I'd go, like through the, what do you call it? All the cupboards, everyone's room, what do you call it? The bread dish. So I didn't get to take that doll to school, but shortly after discovering dolls, I discovered something I liked even more, and that was My Little Ponies. And I remember my first one was Firefly. She was a pink and blue Pegasus, And the same kind of situation happened where one day I went missing. But before I got to that, my firefly magically disappearing, I did start taking my My Little Ponies and dolls to school. It was junior kindergarten, so we, the junior and senior kindergarten students, were on a different side of the school from all the big kids, which meant we were very isolated. It was just like this little kindergarten world. So I was kind of sad that all these other kids got to bring their toys for show and tell, so I wanted to bring mine. So I started to. It was not a big deal. None of the teachers at that age were really concerned. And so the first 2 years of being in school and playing with dolls was not a huge issue. Things changed a lot, though, when I made it to the first grade. My brother was in the school, as I said, and I said he's 5 years older than I am. So he had spent all those years building up his cool man reputation with everyone, and never really looked up to him. And so when we went shopping, back to school shopping, I wanted a Cabbage Patch Kids lunchbox. And my mom got me one. When I brought it home, my brother really lost it. And he was like, Mom, he can't come to school with that. People like older kids are not going to be okay with him carrying around a Cabbage Patch lunchbox. And he can't bring his dolls to school either. He's not with the little kids anymore. And it was too late. I mean, I already had the Cabbage Patch Kid lunchbox. And I didn't really understand because I was like, there are boy dolls and girl dolls in the Cabbage Patch Kids, so what's the big deal? Anyway, the first day of school rolls around, and I'm, walking up to class with now all the big kids, totally not prepared because I'd only been around little kindergartners my whole school career. And so it was like within moments, older kids started laughing at my lunchbox. I didn't care though, because I didn't know them. I didn't care what they thought of me. I was like confused, like I didn't know why they cared. But my brother, he's different from me. He cares about what people think, and that's where I'm saying like things were harder on him than they were on me, because I was just like, I don't know, they're my dolls. I don't see the big deal. And he was trying to fit in, and he did fit in. So I think that was very hard on him. So the first day of school, as I mentioned, kids in his grade, the oldest grade, were picking on me, and I didn't care. So as we were about to leave, this guy in the 6th grade, so my brother's grade, was saying something, and my brother had, he had enough of it. So it was turning into a scrap between, like two 12-year-olds. And I was still confused because I was a little kid. And when the fight finally broke out, I got nervous because it was my brother getting in a fight, and I didn't know he fought all the time. I didn't know how tough he was yet. And so I started attacking that kid with my Cabbage Patch Kids lunchbox, which, I was just a natural reflex because my brother was getting hurt. And I remember hearing all the girls in his grade kind of laughing, going, "Oh, that's so cute. Look at him defending his big brother." And so I remember the kid getting up and looking at us and being like, "Your whole family's crazy," and taking off. And I was like proud. I was like, I stuck up for you. And I was just waiting for my brother to say thank you. He looked down at me and was like, "Don't even talk to me." And I was like, "What? I helped you." So for like the next week or two, he made me walk to school like 10 feet behind him or in front of him. He didn't want to be like seen with me anymore. And that was kind of like my first introduction into, I don't know if it's the male ego is the right thing, or just, like people just caring about what other people think. And I wasn't born with that. So it's something I couldn't relate to personally. And it was only the first year that was really like that, where I had my brother's protection. And so I don't think I went through too much in the first grade of people picking on me, well, the older kids at least. Like, I think so far the kids in my grade were used to me from, kindergarten. So when he left for junior high, when I started the 2nd grade, things started to get different. And the first thing I remember is older kids, some older kids talked to me, and one girl came up to me. She's like, "Oh, we can be friends, right? I'm everyone's friend. Let me be your friend." So me, being a naive 2nd grader, was like, "Oh, that's cool. She seems so nice." She was in like the 5th grade, I believe. So one day we were hanging out on recess, and she was like, "Oh, there's this one thing I wanted to ask you. Now that we're friends, you can tell me. is it, and this is a pretty heavy moment, so it may make people uncomfortable, but she was like, is it true what everyone's saying that you were born a girl, but your mom wanted a son so bad that she got you a sex change? And I was like, I'd never heard that before. And she's like, well, that's what everyone's saying. You don't think it's true? I was like, I don't think it's true. I was like, in my head, I was like, when I get home, I'm going to ask my mom. Because, for me, it was just like, it seemed like an innocent question. And I didn't think that much of it, to be honest. It was just a dumb kid. So when my mom got home from work, I learned very quickly that somebody accusing you of having a sex change was a bad thing. And my mom was just like, what? Who said that? Why would she say that? She was like, you were absolutely born a boy. She was like, I wanted a girl. When your sister came along, I was so happy. So why would I have changed you into a boy? And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's a bad thing. I don't want people to say that about me. So when I went back to school the next day, I was like, my mom says I was born a boy and you're a B word. So that was what was kind of going on with the older kids there. I was kind of vulnerable, but worse than the vulnerability of the older kids was teachers, believe it or not. One day this is still talking about my second grade, a girl in my class brought in this Barbie doll called Magic Moves Barbie. And I had seen the commercials and I thought she was really cool, even though I wasn't really into Barbie. I was more into My Little Pony, and I don't know if Gem was out yet, but I was never a Barbie fan. I was a Gem and the Holograms fan. So she brought this doll to school and was showing the other girls. And so I wanted to try the button too. There was a button on its back. She had a hood on her head, and her arms would, the Barbie arms, they would move up and just take the hood off her head. So I wanted to try that, and we were in the middle of class. And as soon as I had it in my hand and I was like pressing the button, and all the girls around me were going, ooh, that's so cool. The teacher comes storming over. She's like, where did you get that doll? To me. And she was like, is this your doll? And before I could even answer her, she took the doll from me, put it in her desk. She was like, you are not getting this back. And I was like, I'm not getting this back. What do you mean? So I was like, at the end of class, I guess, I'm distracting the kids. So she'll give it back to me at the end of class, and I can give it back to the girl whose doll it is. But she didn't give it back. And 2 days later, I was like, am I going to get that doll back? And she was like, no. Blaine, whose doll is that? And then another girl said whose doll it was. And I said, yeah, so can you give it back? It wasn't even mine. She's like, no, she can't have it back. She shouldn't have been letting you play with it in the first place. And now the next story I have to tell is not from my memory. It's just a story I've always known because it was told to me a lot when I was growing up. And I would think I would imagine it happened in this grade because this teacher, after, taking the doll from me and saying I shouldn't be doing that, it's not normal boy behavior. My mom has always told me that I had to go to a child psychologist when I was really young in school. The school called her and said there was something wrong with me. I wasn't normal. And in order for me to keep going to school, she would have to, take me to a psychologist and find out what was wrong and get it fixed. So, I just try to make it very clear that I don't remember any of this, but it's very embedded in my head because I've heard it so much in my life. Because it is a funny story, I hope. I hope you can find humor in it. So my mom brings me into this to see this child psychologist, and they tell me that they're going to, I'm just going to go, my mom was like, I have to talk to this doctor, Blaine. Can you go into this room? And the doctor said, don't worry, there are toys in there that you can play with. So I walk into the room, and there was like the typical like boy toys for the 80s, like He-Man and Cars. And my mom said, I walked past the boy toys. I looked at the trucks and I was like, ugh, rolling my eyes. And, I passed, what was it? G.I. Joe was that the big thing in the 80s? And I was just like, ew. And then she said, Blaine, then you got to the dollhouse. And okay, I don't know if it's a Newfie thing, but my parents love saying, Blaine, and when you saw those dolls, your eyes lit up like a Christmas tree and you went running over. And I looked at the doctor and I was just like, did you see that? Did you see what he's like? And the doctor said, yeah, I saw that. And I have very bad news for you. And she was like, what? And he was like, you have a perfectly normal son. And the bad news is you're going to have to deal with this. You're going to have to accept him for who he is. And, tell the teachers that I, the child psychologist, said there's nothing wrong with a little boy playing with dolls. He's not violent. He went right past the guns. You should be proud, or you should be happy that your son feels this way. And you should embrace it or whatever he said. So things really did change with my family after that. I remember, and I just have to pause there to say, how lucky was that? This was the 80s when, conversion therapy was a thing, when people were just really anti-LGBT, and especially seeing it in a child, that was a big part of the revulsion everyone was having to me, was like, oh, we can see where this is, what this kid's turning into. And so I'm forever grateful that that was the therapist my mom went to, and that he, said what he said. So that Christmas, I, I was suddenly allowed to get all the My Little Ponies I want, and it was going to be like, my family was just, my parents at least, were really open. But I remember I was at my aunt's that year, and she called me into the kitchen where all the adults, my aunts and my older cousins and my uncles, like teens to early adults, like 30s at the oldest. So she called me in and she's like, Blaine, my parents were in the room, by the way, weren't in the kitchen. She was like, Blaine, what do you want for Christmas? So I got excited thinking she was asking me what I want because, she was going to get me what I wanted. So I was like, a flutter pony, a My Little Pony flutter pony. And then she looked at all the adults and started laughing, and everybody was cracking up about this little boy wanting such a, let's say, a fruity little doll or a fruity little present. And even though adult me is like, wow, that was really uncool for adults to treat a child, because I was probably 7, I would say 7, 8 at the very most, but I think 7. But 7-year-old me didn't feel that way at all. 7-year-old me just looked at them and was like, so am I not getting my flutter pony? Ugh. Like, I'm just telling you that, like, I did not care. I loved my dolls so much. They made me so happy, brought me so much joy, that there was nothing anybody could do to make me feel stupid or to make me not love what I was doing. So, there was another boy in my school who also played with My Little Ponies, but his sister, so sometimes we would play My Little Ponies together, but his sister, older sister, was still in our school. And one day she caught us playing with My Little Ponies over near the library or something. And she started yelling at her brother and saying, like, you can't hang out with this fruity kid. People are going to beat you up, and I'm not going to be here. So you cannot do this at school. And we had played with each other, played with dolls with each other. And so it was like one of those friendships that I was like, oh, that's sad. I'm not going to be able to play with him anymore. So we never, ever did. And it was just like a secret I kept. And, I remember in the 6th grade, this is jumping ahead, but it's not part of the story. I just remember he ordered, we had this book fair, and somebody came in and they were like, oh, who ordered the Little Mermaid book? And he was like, and I just remember like not even looking at him, being like, just like, don't worry, I see you, but I'm not going to look at you when I see you. So I was the one in the school who just did not care what anybody thought. And there was a particular, there were a lot of incidents with the kids like questioning me, but I remember one time in the 3rd grade, we were coming back from recess, and we were lined up to get back inside, and just everybody was surrounding me, and they were like, Blaine, why do you play with dolls? And I was like, because I like them. And they're like, yeah, but they're for girls. And I was like, so? Like, who's even to say that they're for girls? Why do you say they're for girls? And they were like, well, in the commercials, it's always girls who are playing with them. And I said, yeah. So are you saying that you only play with trucks and G.I. Joes because it's boys playing with them in the commercials? It's just the commercials telling you to play with them? And they looked kind of like caught or just confused, right? But my 3rd grade brain took it a bit differently. And they looked back and forth at each other. And I was like, so what if boys played with dolls in commercials? Would you play with them then? And so I was like, and I said, like, does that mean you want to play with dolls, but you won't because of the commercials, and you're mad at me because I do? And they were like, so like, the way they looked at me, I was like, am I on to something? I don't really think that was the case. I think I was just like, they thought I was insulting them, but like, they called me the F slur and called me and said I'm so weird and etc. But at the time I took it very differently. Like, it made me feel more empathy. Maybe there was truth to it, because, I find nowadays there's a bit more positivity toward boys playing with dolls. But at the time, it just kind of made me go, okay, I'm doing what I want to do, and not everybody has that. I think stubbornness is what my mom would call it. I'd call it tenacity. Just because I don't understand, still to this day, I don't understand why I should ever do something that, I don't want to do just because other people will like me more. People who if they cared about me. And it's like, it's a sophisticated thought, but that's what I thought as a kid. Like, why would I be trying to impress people who don't really like care about me as a person? And the other problem I was having at this point in my life, at this stage in my life, is I was starting to gain weight. So I went from being like a cute little feminine kid to a fat, still feminine kid who, you know, I was good at school and that was it. I was good at everything except gym. um, and so, you know, people would always want to come up with nicknames or, you know, sing songs at me to make me feel bad. And I remember older kids especially were bad for that. You know, when I was in third grade, it was like the sixth graders would, you know, they would come to me and be like, oh, what's the name of the My Little Pony you're playing with? And I remember one time I was like, oh, her name's Fizzy. Like, oh, her name's Fizzy? Well, that's what we're going to call you. Fizzy. And I was like, oh, I like that name. She's my favorite My Little Pony. And they're like, oh, wait, that doesn't bother you? I'm like, no, I like it. She's my favorite My Little Pony. You just asked me that. And they're like, oh, well, we're not going to call you that if you actually like it. And there was this thing that clicked in my brain like, oh, people want the satisfaction, or they're only saying these things because they want to hurt me. And I was like, it doesn't bother me. And I wouldn't give them the satisfaction even if it did, now that I know that. And so that was kind of like the experience. That was the monotonous experience. Like, that's kind of what I went through. You know, it was like walking down the street, strangers would be like, you know, are you a boy or a girl? I don't think I look particularly like confusing now, but I just think because, you know, I was a kid and I don't know, but everybody thought, you know, strangers, I'm saying it was like strangers on the street would constantly ask like, you know, if I'm a boy or a girl, you know, I look like a girl. And the worst, so this is where the stories are going to get a little bit heavier because the sixth grade. Nothing really happens out of the mundane. That's a really big story until the sixth grade. Because in the sixth grade was my first time having a male teacher. And when I tell you that man hated me, like, I think I made him physically ill. Just like my existence made him completely uncomfortable. And I'm not defending him, I'm just explaining him, you know, because I was different. It was like the late 80s now, so, you know, people had opinions. But I was a very innocent 11 to 12-year-old, because that's how old I was in the sixth grade. And I thought his hatred toward me stemmed from this speech arts. I don't know if speech arts is something everybody knows. It's where you either recite something from a book or you write something. So I wrote a play for the sixth grade speech arts. We won first place, by the way, so I think it must have been pretty good. But in the play, there was a scene where we were babysitting. So we were babysitting, and the babies had to cry. So I brought my sister's dolls, to school for the play, so that I could use them. You know, there was a button on their back. I make them cry when I needed them to cry for the scene, and then I turn them off when they need to stop. And I brought them in my sister's, oddly enough, Cabbage Patch Kid backpack. And it was just like, I don't know if I really play with dolls that much anymore, but I had them at the school for the longest time. And then one day, my teacher was the male teacher who hates me, who hated me. He was like, whose dolls are these? And then somebody said, oh, those are Blaine's. He brought them for the play. And I mean, I didn't really care that somebody would think I was playing with dolls. But I noticed his repulsion toward me, it just like increased. And there were a couple incidents that happened with him that I was too young to understand, too innocent for my age to understand. One day, so we were learning magnetism, like magnets, you know, positive and negative. And he was explaining to the class that positive and negative attract, because just like in real life, opposites attract. And then he looked at me and said, well, usually. And I just thought, like, all my friends went, ooh, I can't believe he just said that. And I took it as in, like, because I hung out with girls and I was a boy, that I was the sometimes. You know, I'm attracted to the opposite, as in being friends with them. Because my brain, I hadn't hit puberty yet, so I didn't think in terms of adult things. And the next incident that I remember, before my brain matured a little bit to understand what he meant, as I mentioned earlier, I was really good with all like my classes and stuff with my grades. And I would usually finish my homework first. And one day he was putting up decorations, like for hanging them from the ceiling. So when he got over to my desk where I sat, I was done my homework. So I was watching him put up the decorations. He was up on a ladder, like I said, up in the ceiling. So I was just looking up at him innocently as an 11-year-old child, because 11-year-old children, their minds aren't going where his 30-something-year-old mind was going. And he looked down at me and was like, "Are you enjoying the view?" And I honestly was just like, "What? What does he mean? Why would I enjoy the view? You're just putting up like snowflakes." um, so I didn't know yet what that meant, and I didn't really think anything of it aside from my teacher's so weird. However, not long after that is when I started to understand what was going on. So my mom got called back into the school again because of him. And she made it sound like she and my dad were going for a regular, like, meet the teacher night. I guess because I was a kid and she didn't know what was going on yet. She wanted to talk to the teacher before she talked to me. So I was home the night that they went. I remember I was in their bedroom in the back of our apartment reading. So when they got in, they probably didn't know that I was home because I was hidden in the back room, their bedroom. And my mom was just yelling. She was just like, "That man, you know, I can't believe he said that. Calling Blaine not normal. Like, what was he trying to imply? Like, I know what he was trying to imply." And I was like, "Whoa, she's so mad. What was he trying to imply?" And she's like, he kept beating around the bush to my dad. She was like, she's like saying, he's not a normal boy. He hangs out with girls, and I need to get him help before it's too late. She was like, "Oh," and I was telling him. She kept saying to my dad, "You saw the way I was trying to get him to say it. All I was trying to do was say that word, and there would have been a lawsuit. But he refused to say it because he knew if he said it, I would be suing the whole school." And I was like, "What word is she talking about? If he said what?" And then, I'm not even kidding, I will never forget this moment. It hit me. I just looked up at the ceiling and was like, "Oh, I'm gay." Literally, that's how I figured out, put everything together, that's what had been going on my whole life and why people were so, when they would use the F slur against me as a kid, it's like I had all these memories come back like, "Oh, that's why they call me that. That's what they meant by this." But it's like I was always so innocent that I never really thought about it that way as a kid. And now it's like everything was just, rushing to me, and I was suddenly embarrassed. Like, I remember this one story when I was like probably first grade. So, I was really small at the time. I hadn't gained all that weight yet. And I was coming back from swimming. I think I said I was from about 6 or 7 years old, first grade, second grade. And I was wearing, this was the 80s, so shorts were kind of short, especially for kids. And I was wearing like a shirt over my shorts that were a bit long. And when I got back to my building, there were these teenagers up on the balcony above me. Is that really annoying? Up on the balcony above me. And when I got to the building, they called me the F slur and spit on me from above. And I remember thinking in the moment, is it because my shirt's longer than my shorts? Is that what an F slur is? But as soon as that spit hit me right around here, I just went into, I don't know, flight mode, or panicked, and rushed inside. My mom was in the kitchen. She's like, "Oh, how was swimming?" And I was embarrassed and confused and scared. So I just ran into the bathroom to wash my hair because I didn't really understand what happened. So it's like all these little memories I had were coming back to me, or hitting me now, that I was like, "Oh, I'm gay." That's why people were always calling me this and treating me that way. And with that knowledge now, it's like I feel like things kind of got a little bit more, like, things would impact me more. So when people would call me names or treat me weird, I would know where it was coming from, and it would hurt a bit more. One example, and this is probably going to be the worst story that I'm going to tell. One day, as I mentioned, I hung out with all girls, and one day my group of female friends, told me that they just want to hang out with the girls today, and if I can go hang out by myself for that recess. And me thinking nothing of it, because who would think anything of yeah, it's a weird request, but there's no way I was prepared for what happened. When I came back from recess, I went up to the classroom, because this is the classroom with the man who hates me, by the way. So when I went back to the classroom, everybody, all my peers were kind of looking at me funny. And I was just, it's like one of those moments where you felt like the room was just like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I was like, what is going on? Was everybody looking at me like this? People were starting to snicker and laugh. And we were waiting for our French teacher to come pick us up because it was French was the only class we did Rotary for in grade school. So that means there was no teacher in the room. So they're all starting to laugh at me. And I'm like, what's so funny? What's going on? And they were like, oh, so-and-so told us. Somebody spoke up and said, told us why you are the way you are. And I was like, what do you mean the way I am? And then they said that same story that girl asked me in the 2nd grade. They said that so my friends said that I was born a girl and my mom turned me into a boy when I was 2 years old. So I just like, everybody was laughing and going, oh, that explains so much. Now I understand. And I was looking at my friends like, what? Why did you say that? And they were kind of laughing, but I could see their faces shifting, their expressions. Cause I was just like, I was so, like in the moment I felt like, why would you do that? Like so hurt, you know? But what I didn't know is I was starting to like freak out. Like I felt like I was sad, but I was like screaming and yelling and, you know, saying like, why would you do that? Why is this funny? What's wrong with everyone? And I started like, remember, there are no teachers in the room. I started throwing chairs around and like trying to throw them at people. And I was just like screaming and crying and just yelling the same things over and over. And then finally the French teacher showed up and French was my best class. So my teacher was like, Blaine, what is wrong? And I couldn't even like say all the words, but I was just like, you know, through gas, being like, my friends, they told me to have recess by myself. And then when I got back to class, they were all laughing at me and saying that I had a sex change, but I already know I was born a boy because my mom told me. And she was just like, okay, calm down. So she kind of brings me out in the hall and has me sit on the floor of the hallway. And so now the male teacher who hates me comes back and he's like, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with him? And so the teacher was trying to explain and he just looked at me and rolled his eyes. He was like, oh, he's so dramatic. So I'm not laughing like that's funny. I'm laughing like that's, you know, so wild it's funny. You know what I mean? This Brett won't go in. Oh, I see what I did wrong. So their solution, and keep in mind, 80s again, people don't know how to deal with what's going on. So there was no rule book on how to handle these things. I was a one-of-a-kind kid in this school. And so what their solution was, bring me to the French classroom. And we had these bookshelves that were on wheels. So my teacher sat me in the corner and put, you know, back corner of the room, and then put the two bookshelves like encasing me so that I was sitting in, if the bookshelves were 3 feet wide, I was in a 3x3 room for the rest of the period. And just, you know, she was like, just stay in here till the period's over, which was, I guess, 45 minutes. You know, calm yourself down. And then when you're ready, you know, you can join the class. And so it did take me a long time to calm down, but then all of a sudden I was like, oh no, this is my favorite class. What verbs are they conjugating? I'm going to be behind. And so I kept trying to peek out between the two bookshelves and I would see my friends kind of staring back at me and like trying to apologize. And I was just like, ugh, you're not my friends. And, you know, that was like a turning point in my life where I was just like, okay, I'm very different and I have to be very like careful for myself because even my friends for no reason can just like for their own entertainment can decide to do something like that. And I just have to be prepared. You know, it's like, it's not fair, sure, but I live this life and meaning like, you know, I want to be my real self, etc. And so that was kind of like the beginning of me, you know, coming to terms with myself, which I think, you know, it all comes back to my experience playing with dolls and just, I love them so much that they were always the catalyst of me being myself and being happy and never letting anybody, you know, come between me and what makes me happy. And there's no reason that they should. And I was worried that the story might go over a little bit. So I brought one more doll to change just in case. While I just kind of close out and say, you know, this sounds really negative, but if you're curious, like where it went from there, that summer, this was the summer now between the 6th and 7th grade, which was going from grade school to junior high, puberty hit me hard. So when I rejoined my peers in junior high, we were now with 6th graders, well 7th graders now, from all over the city. So we were all having like a new beginning. And here I was, the tallest kid in the class. Now my weight had like distributed because I grew up. So now it was like I was like strapped instead of like obese. And I was taking my brother's clothes because my brother, like I said, he was older, so he wore all the best clothes. And so I was going to school with the kids who picked on me for all those years, and they were little pipsqueaks now. And I was now popular, which is such a weird turnaround. And it was one of those things where I was just like walking past the kids in school who were now the timid ones, and I was like, call me Barbie boy, do it now. And I'm not saying that that's good. I'm not saying I handled it correctly, but I'm just saying that like things changed for me when I got to junior high. And I think the reason I wanted to tell these stories, not just because it's pride and, talking about like these kind of things can help. Most collectors within any doll community, they are females. And so it is a unique perspective to grow up, especially as a kid, because I didn't want to do it in the shadows or in the closet, if you will. I wanted to bring my dolls with me the way other little kids brought their toys. I didn't want to have to, not go to show and tell with my dolls. Like, I was so jealous those first, couple weeks there. And that wasn't fair. Not that not that any of it was fair, but still, because of, like my generation, kids having to get used to some of us being a little bit different, I find that it's gotten better. We've made so many strides where most companies are trying to make boy dolls or appeal to let's say collectors or just boy kids. I don't know, kids who play with dolls. And I remember maybe it was about 10 years ago, but 10 at the most, I walked into a Walmart, and when I passed the toy section, there was this big poster of a Baby Alive display. It was down the toy aisle, and the big poster for Baby Alive had a little boy playing like in the ad. And it just made me think like, oh, if that had existed when I was a kid, I could have rubbed that in everyone's faces. When they said, why do you play with dolls? I could have said, well, did you not go into the Walmart aisle? There's a little boy with a Baby Alive doll, and then there was that Machino Barbie commercial, and so these things exist, and it had to start somewhere. And I was just, in my time, someone who didn't want to wait for someone else. I didn't want to wait for it to be okay because I thought it was okay. However, I do always also want to emphasize that it was okay for me for whatever reason, and it's not always safe for everyone. So, as much as we say be yourself, do what makes you happy, it has to be within reason and when it's safe. So I feel like it would be really irresponsible if I said this and the wrong person saw it and was like, oh, I'm going to bring my dolls to school, and then, it's not a safe environment. I'm not saying it was completely safe for me, but, I was born with this certain tenacity that I just don't care. And I don't mean that in a sociopathic way. I just mean like, I literally don't understand why I should care if I love something and it makes me happy, why I should, dim that love to fit in with people I don't fit in with. Like, you don't care that it makes me happy, so why am I trying to fit in with you? And so, if that's something that people, can take away from this, then good. And sorry, her hair is stuck on everything. And so, that's kind of what I reflect on with my dolls, especially during this month. And I think a lot of pride for me as a person is just existing. It's like, I'm not at a rally. I mean, I'll be at the parade, sure, whatever, but I'm not, I'm just going to my corporate job, just, being the person I am and never hiding it. It's like, I don't come out of the closet. I just mention my partner, and, it's just a thing that I treat as normal because it is normal. And so for me, it's always been about normalizing things that, there's a history behind why it's not considered normal, but You know, there are other people like me who would like to play with dolls and, would like to be authentic. And it may be nice to know that, sorry, one day, if you can't do it now, one day you may be like me and living in a dollhouse. I'm not sure if that's any consolation. But yeah, that's why I will always be like a proud doll collector. I will always, I will never hide what I enjoy. And even when it comes to dating, anything, it's like, if you care, if you're going to matter to me, then this isn't going to matter to you. So I hope that this video is not a little too extreme, and if anybody just played it on um, no volume, twice the speed, I can totally understand that. And so here are this Celeste won't be part of the Pride display, but the other 6, they're going to be like the rainbow display. And so thank you for joining me on this kind of weird, rambly video. But, if you didn't love what I was talking about, hopefully you at least love the dolls. So thank you to everyone, and I'll see you next time.